It's a lot of fun to make notes, but how often do your notes end up actually producing something? Are you a note maker, not a note user? So does using your notes actually happen? And I take tons of notes. I take notes all the time, and I have for a really, really long time. But for years, I was just kind of like a note taker. I never actually used my notes, and it was really frustrating because I knew that my notes had the ability to really, really be helpful. I just did not have a system for how to take care of them. As a chronic note maker, this plagued me for years. I was like below operating capacity, making tons of notes, but not having the ability to recall my notes and to use my notes. And as a pastor, I'm kind of like in a note-heavy enterprise here. So this is the second video in my series on creating and using a theological Zettelkasten. And today we're going to dive deep down into understanding notes, how notes get made, but more so how notes get filed in the Zettelkasten, and how this is an approach that allows you to actually be a person that uses your notes. The big thing here is that there's a linear versus a non-linear approach to notes. A linear approach, it's just like anything else linear. There's A to B to C to D. And this makes sense if everything's happening at the same time. But the power of thinking, the power of reading, the power of making notes, and the power of creating things and going back and thinking about the same thing again is it's not time bound. It's not a linear approach to time. So therefore, your notes need to be fashioned in a non-linear way. And that's the absolute beauty of Zettelkasten is it's a highly organized approach to non-linear note making that allows the user to both go and find their notes and then use their notes as they are doing something else. And the best way for me to explain this is to show you how notes get permanently put inside of the main box of a Zettelkasten. And that main box is the absolute finished approach, the thing that you are using when you have it. So we're going to take a non-linear way of teaching you about Zettelkasten, how to build a Zettelkasten, but explain this 100% crucial, distinguishing concept. It's about, information before building. That's kind of the teaching dynamic I'm doing in this video. Information before building. Understanding how it works before we dive straight into the thing. So what's up, friends? I'm Chad Brooks. I'm a pastor here in Louisiana, and on this channel we talk about building better Bible systems, but this is a series of videos about using an analog Zettelkasten for knowledge management. If you've not watched the first video in the series, you might want to go back and do that. The link will be up here. I also have a playlist where I'm collecting all of these Zettelkasten videos. So if any of this sounds intriguing, I just encourage you, go back to square one and watch this through. If you're liking this, make sure to like, subscribe. Please come hang in the comments. The comments are my absolute favorite thing. And if you're curious what I do with all this information, one of these examples is I write emails to a theological writing list. They come out every couple of weeks, and you can subscribe to that in the link down below. But let's jump into the primary topic today, which is understanding how card structure works in a Zettelkasten in this non-linear approach to note-taking. The first thing to understand as we're talking about this is the concept that cards don't stand alone. For some people who like to use note cards to manage information, every single card stands alone, and you might have a giant, huge box of them like Ryan Holiday, where all the cards are stuck, and you might try to organize them by tags. But that just makes a complicated linear system that might even make it more difficult to find a trail of thoughts throughout notes. Categorization by topic is still a linear system, but when you go hyper into it, it makes it really difficult to find things that may or may not be related because some of the ideas that are part of them don't necessarily connect in a linear system. Remember, Zettelkasten is a non-linear system. It's not time-bound, but it is idea-bound. So in the last video about Zettelkasten, I did hint on card structure a little bit. Sorry if it was a fire hose. But I think that understanding the card structure is the best place to understanding the beauty of this non-linear approach to Zettelkasten. Remember that your Zettelkasten functions as this giant living organism. The analogy of a tree is something that's, pretty common. So imagine you've got a category in your main card box called 1.0.1. Let's say this is general theology. Now, there are people that want to structure that 1.0.1 as far as a more pragmatic approach to it. I find it's best to lean into the non-linear approach of Zettelkasten and allow your tags to help you find things. But tags are a different video for the future. We're talking about understanding the non-linear approach to Zettelkasten through how cards sit in the main box. So you would have 1.0.1 is general theology, and then 1.0.1/1 would be your first card in the idea. And this is literally just the first idea that drops inside of that file. Has nothing to do with order of importance or whatever. So you might be thinking that, well, Chad, then does that just mean that my box is going to look like 1.0.1/1, 1.0.1/2, 1.0.1/3, all the way to like 1.0.1/48? No. Now, when you're starting a Zettelkasten, that might happen some, but I'm teaching you how to avoid that. But if it does, it's not a big deal at all. It can change. You have your 1.0.1/1/A, which means, you've already figured out some sort of a structure and you have an outline and you're going to follow that format. So 1.0.1/1/A is, point one of the outline. So 1.0.1/1/B would be the second part of the outline. You also can have cards that are like 1.0.1/1/2, which is simply just saying you're chaining more information underneath that /1 card. Now remember, the main points of thought, if outline, is going to use that A, B, C, but then also you're just adding information under that. Now this seems really complicated, and what the best way for me to show you this is I'm going to walk you through several different branch structures from my own Zettelkasten to give you an idea of how I build these things out. But then also remember that this is non-linear. The linear approach lives in time. What I love is I've got branches in my Zettelkasten that have notes that were made 18 months away from each other. So I'm making a new note. I finish the card. The last thing I do is sort it into the box, and I go through the box. I go through my tags. I find the best place for it to go. And a lot of times I realize, I made a note about that. And this is either supporting that information or adding yet another major part of the outline. So it's going to live behind that card. So as I said earlier, the best way to understand this is not me running a bunch of numbers off on the video to you. It's to show you some different card sections that I have in my Zettelkasten. So we're going to go to where I keep my Zettelkasten. We're going to go to the top-down camera, and I'm going to walk you through these. And we're going to look at these through a couple of lenses. The first one is just basic chains of information. The second is I want to show you how I use the Zettelkasten method to do exegesis and study Scripture. And then the third is some larger collections. One of these is just an assortment of ideas that are somewhat loosely gathered together. And then I want to walk you through a couple of lines that I thought about intentionally before I started them, as well as show you something that's literally in development right now that I've been working on for the last couple of days. So the first cards we're going to look at, they're not even in my Zettelkasten yet. You'll see that these things are relatively new. 6/2/26. That was just a couple of days ago. These are 5/31/26, 5/31/26. So you can tell, this is stuff I'm thinking through. And if I'm honest, I remember I started making these notes on 5/26/26. So I'll add that real quick for you there. But what we have here, sometimes when I'm working on a concept in Zettelkasten, here's the deal. This started off as this big, huge drawing I had, and I realized this is going to go in the Zettelkasten. So I started making this original card right there. And I knew enough to know, okay, this is my one big idea that I need to share. And then I had this second idea to understand how this fork theory, this is something I'm working on right now. And so I made some notes right there. And this was sitting next to my computer at my main desk for a couple of days. And then I realized I was reading a book called The Vanishing Church by Ryan Burge, and he talked about this thing called path dependence. And I was like, you know what? This path dependence really fits inside of this idea called fork theory. So I'm going to go ahead and make a card and make a note in the book that I've already made the card for this. On 531, I found a quote from Richard Lovelace that really pulls into this idea of what fork theory is. And so the quote is there in black. And then I made my own notes under here. And I did a little bit of highlighting, so it chains those together. And I thought about, I already knew that there was going to be some tags. And so it has a couple tags given to it already. Fork theory, realized, known, unknown, two concepts I'm working through. And then I made sure to make a note on that card, the re-ref, Dynamics of Spiritual Life. B-ref, The Vanishing Church. That means that is a book that's in my bib card. And then the re-ref, this came out of Readwise. So my reference to find this, if I need to cite it, is going to be inside of Readwise. And then I found this right here in another book called Start at the End. And it's this idea, and I tagged it world building, which is another one of my big tags. And you'll notice that from my Bible notes as well. This idea of what's something called the multiverse that's talking about science fiction. And so inside of this idea that I have called fork theory, which is kind of philosophical and change-based. It can live inside of theology. It can also live inside of church development, which is what I do for a living. You also have a quote from a book called Start at the End, which is a business book about entrepreneurship. You've got a quote from Richard Lovelace's Dynamics of Spiritual Life, which is a spiritual formation book. And then you got a reference from The Vanishing Church, which is a book about statistics to understand church engagement and church decline. Tons of very different sources, and what I'm doing right now is just kind of collecting these things, and it's almost about to get dropped in to the Zettelkasten. You'll also notice that I made a number 1 and a number 2 note. And so really what's going to happen is when I find myself in this situation, I realize that this is going to be a long, long thread, and I'm going to go ahead and make a Zettelkasten card in front of you right now to show you how I will do that and what the first card in this set would look like. And so I'm just going to title this Fork Theory. Main branch, because I know this is going to be something larger that's going on. And I know that these two cards are going to be part of the bigger structure. I know that these cards are going to be like ancillary information, and I'm not sure how that's all going to go together yet, but I'm going to keep on thinking about this for a couple of days, and I'll show you in the next card set how do I use this main branch card. I don't know where this is going to go in my Zettelkasten yet, but what I do know is this will be a slash number. This will be its own new unique subsection of my Zettelkasten. So that's one idea, is what do I do when I'm thinking about an idea and I'm collecting tons of ideas before I enter any of these cards into my Zettelkasten. There's one example. Okay, so I've got several cards I'm going to show you and kind of walk you through what stuff looks like. But the first thing to really see and understand is you've got cards like this. And so in this card, let me zoom in for you. This is just a quote that I have from Charles Taylor's The Secular Age, one of the books that I'm just constantly reading and enthralled with. And it's standalone. You see 2.0.1/2. And my Zettelkasten, that is for secularization theory. This is a standalone card. It has a tag on it. I think that says humanism. Yes, my own handwriting is horrible to myself as well. But there's nothing behind this card. So kind of the basic level filed in the Zettelkasten, you have a card that has no buddies right now, but it will one day. It might will. And then we move into these, and I've got a lot of these. This is just like a basic chain, and this card stack I was going to show you, this is just kind of a framework to understand strategy. We use this at my job a lot, and we call it the vision pathway. So objective, strategy, then tactics. Also have when you have a passion and then you have a need, this middle spot it's going to inform things, but you're still like in an info gathering state. So the next card in the thing is 3.3/5/1. And in my Zettelkasten, the 3.3s are strategy and planning. And so I've got a quote here from a book called Scaling People. It was a great book. There's a date on this card, 12/7/24. So you see right there, started off with 10/8/24. And 2 months later, found another card to go behind it. And it's 3.3/5/1. So this is just similarly sorted information. There's not an outline structure or anything like that. It's just these cards are like brothers and sisters. They like to hang out together. Then I got another card from like 6 months after the thing started from Cal Newport's Deep Work, which I read years ago. This showed up inside of Readwise. And here you see those stickers I talked about in the last video with that thermal printer, to where I'm just adding on this idea of what's called lag measures. And I know, this is inside of this deck because, this belongs really inside of the strategy section. So, this actual thing, I might do a little bit of work on this and kind of give some more structure, but this is just like random information. That's what you have going on here, but they're grouped together. So that's an example of a tiny little branch structure with just 3 cards in it. Now, this next one I'm going to show with you is, let's do another one. So we got a couple of those. So, okay, here's a very old and very large structure. We're not going to go through this whole structure because it's really, really big. This predates when I was putting my dates on here, so I do know that means it's probably from at least the middle of October of 2024. And it's just this statement. This isn't, we have to make the missional shift that church isn't enjoyment but mission. And I've got a quote from here from this guy. I probably read this in a blog post or heard it somewhere else. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And I see it tagged here, change and mission. So this whole stack, because this is an example of what happens early on when you really don't understand the system, like I'm trying to teach you now, is you do get more random bunches of somewhat related information. And that's what this is, but I mean, this is multiple cards deep. Like this ends at 5.0.2/4/3. And so as I flip through this, I see 5.02/4/A. So I've got a little bit of a branch breaking out there. Another quote from an evangelism person, but it came from an article on American demographics, which I have saved in a digital tool if I want to read the full article again. So we got a little branch there with the A's, and then we just pop into the /4/1s. So just kind of more random supporting information on the first card, random information supporting the next card behind it. And then right here, it does jump off into like another A category. So the /4/1A. Start with those who don't like change, make them feel validated. So this is this branch starting off, I can tell now, is about how do you deal with people who are struggling with change. Then we go to another one, B, resist the nostalgic longing, restore the church to a time when you imagine it to be perfect. So that's coming from a book, Cultural Christianity in the Early Church. That's a very, very different type of book. So you see this information starting to link here, but this idea of nostalgia. So more stuff on nostalgia, moving out of sentimental faith with the lists that I've made, and that's just my own thoughts. And we pick up another branch. So we're still on the /4/1 now C. So you can see how that branch is expanding out more. Nothing changes until there's a change in behavior. And so that's the only card that's sitting there on that branch. But this is a place where people begin acting differently. That's from a book called Canoeing the Mountains. And we find, so all of this right here, all of these cards, and you can just see the plethora that's expanding off of this /1 branch. Now we have /2, which is just more random information, but it's somewhat sorted differently, still supporting the OG card is what that's doing now. And then another /3. So from another book, and this is from April. So you look, this started probably October of 24. Last card is from April of 26, and it's a /3. So it's just kind of another bit of larger supporting information. So like this whole stack of cards has evolved, even though I didn't have the structure as best in place when I started it, it's emerging and I can find a structure and cards still get dropped into that. So next I want to show you a series of cards because you can absolutely use Zettelkasten. These blue tabs are just for my notes I'm talking to y'all today. But you can absolutely use Zettelkasten to frame out exegesis work. So on this card right here, you have a main card 1.0.2/9. That's my category for the New Testament. And this is the 9th big idea, the big branch inside of that 102 tree. And at this main card, this is when I have an idea of what's going on, what I want to do. And so I have the verses next to it alongside of, and I use the A, B, C, D, E structure to build stuff off of it. And so I've got a number 1 card. So it's just supporting information behind the 9. And then I have my A, my reference, keywords, that sort of stuff. And I also have in red a link to my journal from 2/4/25. So you can reference back into other things. And I've done a lot of videos on my journal, so I'm not going to go into that too much. So supporting information for A, it's a word study from Mark 11 to tempt, test, or try. I got the Strong's number next to it, some BDAG definitions, and some other things. So just a quick word study on the card. Then we go into the B section, C, D, E, F, F1. So I can always come back. Like I might get bored one evening and decide I want to come do some more work on Mark 8:14-21. So F has some supporting information behind it. Another card of supporting information behind it. And then I decided that this might need to break off into an A category behind that. So you can see how the different branches in that tree expand. And at the front of this main card, I've got a quick understanding of at least where those verses in that pericope are going to go. So here's another example coming up. So this is a pericope. So this is a big section of scripture. And then next is, what happens when I really get into one verse. This is a deep dive into a single passage. And you'll notice I'll write main card on this so I know this is the front end. So this is 1.0.2/11. So still in the New Testament, the 11th big branch of that whole tree. So I just wrote the first verse here. You see big main card. And then I just did some outlining of some ideas. And you'll see here, this is not the same kind of exegesis framework of that. This is me just kind of riffing off of this one verse, and I even left myself a note. This is all worthy of good research. So this might get stretched out a lot more one day. So we see, boasting. And this is all under that 11/1. So boasting. So word study of boasting. More stuff on boasting. I have a note here, Keener, 2 Corinthians. And while we're here doing this, that's the fun. I told y'all, this is a living document. When you go back inside of these cards, sometimes you make edits and such, just like I'm doing now. So there's a note for me to go and read more about this boasting from Craig Keener's commentary on 2 Corinthians. And there's the page number right there. Occurrences of how boasting shows up inside of a few chapters of 2 Corinthians in chapter 10, chapter 11, chapter 12. So, making that kind of stuff right there. Now we move off of the boasting onto Paul and his missionary strategy. You see it says 2 right there. If we go back to the main card, 2, Paul's larger missionary strategy. So I've got notes, some more supporting information on that. Then number 3, sphere of service. Yet again, that shows up on the sphere of service. And so we'll just kind of flip through that. And you see I'm doing some more word study and some things like that. I realized that I needed some just broader supporting information. Corinthians and Paul's timeline. When did Paul write 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and where did he write it from? Number 5, and I don't think number 5, it might not even be on here, but it's random notes. Yeah, so 5 starts off right there. So that's under sphere of activity. But also mark there. So sometimes you're going to find mistakes, and it's all right if you find mistakes because you got a card address. So even if that's kind of wonky, I'll fix that off camera. Because this isn't perfect. This is a working, living document. And then I did a 6 that is completely not on side of this, but it's just other bibliographic information of some things I might want to go into. So there's how I do, deep level exegesis on a single passage of Scripture, and how you find that inside of the Zettelkasten. And one more, Scripture exegetical example. But this actually comes from some work I did when I was writing my book on mission and the inward church. And it's all coming into, so I titled it here. And some people say you have to title every card. You don't, but sometimes you do, and sometimes it's necessary. So I did that. So the Great Commission is a relational, missional mandate, quick outline. I remember making this card inside of an airport lounge when I was traveling. It's not even dated, so it's been sitting there. So a lot of these cards, so here I decided to make an A bracket to do a little bit of, it looks like I'm repeating because I've got my card addresses right there for the broad outline, but I also have these additional notes to what this outline looks like. So that got an A because there's a branch off. It's like its own unique subset. Then we have the therefore, 1.0.3/5/1, 1.0.3 in my Zettelkasten is Teachings of Jesus. And you see the therefore, 1.0.3/5/1. So it's the same thing that you've seen elsewhere, but you'll see inside of this. And what's great is I can come back into these ideas because I'm thinking about this stuff quite often. So you got, random quotes. You got some basic idea of things. Disciple is named in the book of Acts as a way to describe the early church. Disciples is an identifier. So this is all the time that the idea disciple shows up inside of Acts. There's 25 total references. I'm making a list about these in my 2025 Bible, but I found other names. What's the difference? The question, and that this list has gotten a lot bigger in my 2026 Bible. So some quick word study, but I'm following these headings. You see another note there from a book, the Little France commentary, because there's two France commentaries I have on Acts, page 420. And you see the information, and then I'm leaving my notes. And I normally like to do that in another color. You see I've got quotes and stuff that are sitting in a different section of my Zettelkasten. So 10.4 in my Zettelkasten is flipping through. I don't have these memorized. This is going to be inside of ecclesiology, and so I got a couple of notes that might that do relate to there. So I've tagged it inside. Another quote from a book, and then the 6 Christianity is relational. This is just kind of like a header. Goes back to number 6 there. And there's no information behind it, but I can come back to this. That's the thing, it's non-linear. You can come back to it and work it. So that's a lot of exegesis. Now, what about if you're thinking of a concept and you want to track a concept in a big way? This is a great example of this. And yet again, I remember where I made this card. I was eating lunch at a Hardee's truck stop in I-10 in South Louisiana on 10/8/24 and made a lot of these cards. And so you sit down, main card, and you see the same thing. I did out these big addresses because I knew how I was going to want to think about this. And there's a bunch of blue cards, and whenever I pull a card from my Zettelkasten and it's part of a larger project, I just drop one of these blank blue index cards to signal to myself that the card is elsewhere, and I can go find it. So, 10.4.1/A, which I already have noted there, arguments against conversion. So this is another one of my thoughts, why the main line needs to recover the belief and practice of conversion. We're still sitting aside of that. Conversion, Christian, what does it mean to be a Christian? Working on conversion. And you're seeing kind of the full spectrum across things. There's a blue card, so that card is Alpha in a research project. A history of conversion. And there's nothing between these two, but I knew I wanted to leave space for this larger project, so I did it this way. Tons of stuff in Alan Creeder's work that probably belongs in there that I'll get to one day. I'm not worried about it. The mechanics of conversion. So how does conversion work? I've got some stuff in there already. And again, remember, there's no BREF or XREF or anything like that or re-refs. So these are all my own thoughts. But here's a BREF, Karl Barth's Romans book. Grace is altogether, yes, it's salvation, comfort, and edification. Through the dissolution of the outer man, the inner man is renewed day by day. Karl Barth is page 103 in that book. And I've got, my own thoughts in there. More on the mechanics of salvation. 2 Thessalonians. I've got a note to link to my journal in there. All sorts of stuff. A lot of Wesley notes. And so you see Wesleyan theology showing up here as a tag. So I can find this randomly if I'm searching for Wesley stuff. More Wesley references from a book called Transforming Evangelism. More stuff from Transforming Evangelism. Practical developments of conversion. It's conversion of the heart. A couple scriptures, a reference to Barth Romans, and then also I'm referencing something from my journal from 1012, so I can go back there and find out what I'm thinking. So you see there's interconnectedness. So I'm just flipping through all of these things, and you can see the difference between like these titles and that sorting and how all these cards work out and how multiple bits of information for multiple works is categorized together inside of the Zettelkasten system. And since it's nonlinear, I can always come back to this and I can add in new pieces of information that I find to be worthwhile. I hope you found this dive into Zettelkasten interesting, and just by seeing how cards work in a relationship with each other, how the structure is built out, that nonlinear idea-based thinking rather than being time-bound or topic-bound. And at this point, you might be saying, Chad, okay, you're beginning to convince me. I'm ready to start working on this thing. What do I do? I would tell you the exact same thing I did when I was beginning to investigate Zettelkasten. I said, from this point forward, I'm going to start making cards, and when I figure the method out, at least I'll have a stack of cards to start thinking about and processing as I build out the rest of my Zettelkasten. So do just that. I had a cardboard box. It was in that shelf over there, and I would literally go through and make cards based off of reading highlights or quotes I came across using Readwise, which is a fantastic tool that is integral to my Zettelkasten, but we'll talk about Readwise at a later video. Or just ideas, and I just started randomly writing them down, and I wouldn't try to tag them. I would put the date on them. It's helpful to put the date on them right now. But just, write down things and try to keep it contained to one idea. Don't worry about big, huge structures or anything like this. Just get a single idea down on a single index card and throw it in the box. And let them start sitting there as you explore what it means to start a theological Zettelkasten. So, thank you so much for watching this video. I'll be back pretty soon, and next week's video might be a little bit different because I'll be traveling on the road and wildly busy at the same time. But make sure to like, to share this. Please come hang out in the comments down below. Subscribe to the email list, and I will see you back in the next video.